officially start at 8:15. I'd like to welcome you all to our third meeting for Equity and Partnership. And today we have a full agenda, including a visit from our governor. So we're going to move through our items fairly quickly and then make space for feedback and direct conversation with our governor as well. So our first item on the agenda is an invitation to Dr. Doris McEwen to share the outcome of our advisory committee discussion and some other important items.
Thank you, Chair Mara, and to the subcommittee members and our staff support present, as well as to Rob Saxton, our Deputy Superintendent for Public Instruction in the state of Oregon. Before you is a document that says staff report, or maybe not, but it should be in your folder. And let me just start by going through this in a general way. The draft equity lens is a charge that the committee has taken on to give some framework around how the Oregon Education Investment Board will look at equity in terms of its strategic investment and its other work throughout the state. So the Equities and Partnership Committee itself has drafted an equity lens. It was presented at the February 12th meeting and has been reviewed by both Chairperson Marr and myself following that meeting. And the lens that's being presented today to the subcommittee actually has incorporated some of those revisions that we discussed during our meeting at February 12th. So the new equity lens, for example, the new equity lens draft will have a preamble and extended belief statements, some definitions, and other items that were discussed so that we can incorporate that feedback. We also took the document to an advisory committee for the Equity and Partnerships Committee. The advisory committee met on March 4th, and we have an advisory committee that consists of 10 people, 6 of whom were able to attend the meeting, along with 2 staff members. And we had the following kind of general comments that were captured from the meeting. They liked the idea of a statewide direction for the equity lens, looking at it as a way to frame the conversations around closing the achievement gap for students of color in our education system. And this would be a mechanism for reviewing equity work. The equity lens itself, the feedback was it should provide a common language for discussion by the state on equity. It should frame the discussion about every learner and answer questions about whether we are satisfied with the outcomes, particularly as we know there's a significant achievement gap between students of color and their white counterparts. Other areas of consideration was to help distribute the distribution of funds around strategic initiatives, and that the belief statements that are listed in the document might need to be brought closer to the front of the document so that it's very evident what those beliefs are. There were comments about poverty needing to be more definitive and intentional in the document. The advisory committee, thought the preamble itself was good, and that we may need to say that we have to differentiate resources as an investment in equity, that we need to be sure the language is clear on what drives poverty conversations and race conversations. In other words, there was a lot of conversation about whether we were diminishing the equity, the racial emphasis of the equity lens by also trying to include too much. So that would be some advice for the subcommittee to take a look at in further discussion. There was an emphasis on, or a need, according to the subcommittee, for an emphasis on the poverty impact on the back end. In other words, if we don't put our investments in our educational initiatives around equity, then we're looking at prison as opposed to financing prisons as opposed to financing schools. There were comments about using strength-based language and for the committee to take into consideration, not language of dismantlement. And belief statements about students, they didn't see that as evident enough in the document itself. There was an emphasis on, there should be an emphasis on system reform and inclusiveness. And I always like to use the phrase, when I was superintendent, I would say we are a school system and not a system of schools. So it's the same concept for the state to consider in the development of the equity lens. Belief system needs to be connected to outcomes. And that was one of the large areas that seemed to be missing in the equity lens document itself, is that if we're going to have belief statements, that when we have our outcome statements, there should be a natural link between those. More emphasis on special education, clarity on equity for gays and lesbian lifestyles, emphasis on learning as a reflective process. And then there were a couple of questions, overall questions for the Oregon Education Investment Board to consider, or for this subcommittee to consider as it presents the equity lens to OEIB. Number one would be, what is the purpose of the equity lens? And for that, an example would be, would it be part of performance reviews? And then the other area was, what's the expectation for districts to sign on? How's the document really going to frame the conversation in school districts? Two members of the subcommittee were asked to work together to propose language on poverty and race so that neither is diminished in the document. The draft equity lens itself has been sent now to about 45, I say about, because it continues to grow, which is a good thing, to 49 organizations and individuals throughout the state, primarily organizations. And we have received some responses, and those are included in the packet that the subcommittee has been presented with this morning. The equity lens itself, there were some, tried to capture just a couple of the written comments that are attached, and one of them has to do with rewording the statement about the beliefs for community colleges and colleges, and indicating that we want to make sure that we are purposeful and strong with our language around community colleges and colleges, that there's a collective goal, and that as the statement reads now, it might be taken that we are not giving the higher education systems the credit that they need. In other words, we're asking them to prove their worth, and that was almost a direct quote. So I want to make sure that you are aware of that. And then strengthening belief statements about special education. So those are the two that have been pulled out at this point. So Chair Mara, that is the staff report for your consideration as you discuss the equity lens document this morning.
So I've had an opportunity to review several of the letters and the feedback provided thus far, and overwhelmingly it's been incredibly positive, and there's been a lot of excitement expressed about the timeliness and appropriateness of having a document of this nature. So I think that feedback is appreciated, and we're excited to see the rest of the feedback. But for the purposes of our short discussion time, it seems like we have some critical issues to really kind of cover, which is how the subcommittee feels about expanding the purpose of the document outside of our original charge, which was really around rural students of color and students out of school youth, to a larger population of disability, LGBTQ, and the conversation of poverty. So, in the creation of this document, we looked at a lot of efforts around the country and on a local level, and we saw some pretty significant evidence that when a document becomes everything to all different groups, the power of that document is diminished, and so just trying to figure out, I think, where and how to best incorporate those other populations, and if this is the right place, and if it's not, where is the right place, because I certainly believe focusing on the needs of students with disabilities, LGBTQ students, and students in poverty is very important as well. We have 2 suggestions for improved belief statements about both teachers and students. And we may want to take some time to discuss the suggestion about colleges and universities, because I think there are many perspectives. Any other important discussion topics we need to cover in our short discussion time together that I've missed? Any feedback?
No, I think you've hit all of them. I'd like us, I know we haven't discussed higher ed or post-secondary ed in detail. I think there are different needs, and I think we need to articulate different approaches. While there's certainly much more to be done, community colleges have been a place of, a point of access and success for students of color and students coming from backgrounds that are impaled by poverty, and also rural students. And again, this is not to say that there isn't a lot of work to be done. I think the situation has been different for universities, and so I'd like us, as we get toward it, to have a separated discussion, not that there shouldn't be a unitary discussion on post-secondary, but I think there are different phenomena, different issues, different patterns of success, and I think it's worthy to take a look at some of what's gone on there, including those community colleges that have been most successful with the populations we've talked about, and those universities that have been, in particular, in certain kinds of programs as we extol best practice. So I'm just making more of a plea that that as we do that discussion, we would pay attention to best practice, of course, but we would also take a look at how differences have prevailed across. And that is, again, not to say that I think that anybody who reviews its serious opinion that it all has been done, but there have been different patterns.
So let me first appreciate that remark, and then also give us some guidelines and parameters about what we need to accomplish today. So we have about 20 minutes before the governor gets here, and we are looking to present our best possible document in April to the OEIB. And so for the purposes of our time today, we need to figure out what's our most important feedback and what we can decide in order to give that charge to Doris, or figure out any work we need to do in between, because I appreciate your request for a separated discussion, Samuel, but I don't think that that's going to happen today.
Okay, I'll stay.
So
I've been pushing for 42 years for this, so it's okay.
So I guess what I'm trying to get to is, on this piece of the feedback we received with colleges and higher ed, and sort of, I think we can have a separated and longer discussion, but we need to sort of figure out what advice we can give Doris today to resolve this issue.
Nicole, there was a very discrete piece of feedback related to just one of the belief statements that mentions community colleges and universities, and I agree with the feedback. The way the statement is written, it has a sort of distancing effect related to community colleges and universities, when I think the general feel of this document is one where we're really embracing these challenges, embracing our role in being responsible for solving them. So I'm referring to the fourth from the last. In order to achieve our collective goals, community colleges and universities must demonstrate they can serve these populations. Well, community colleges and universities are here to stay, and I think that I don't have language in my head that this needs to be kind of consistent with the others, and sort of taking responsibility for that. for that challenge.
Yeah, so it sounds like the direct thing that we can do to improve this is really, frankly, to improve the tone of the language. I do know that it is important to many folks that we be incredibly clear that while, as a state, we are a humble funder of the community colleges and of our higher education system, we're one of many. However, our outcomes for students of color and many rural students are not the same as white students in our community colleges, and they are not the same in our university system. And in fact, the outcomes have consistently declined. So I think you're right. We have to make really clear language that is affirming and positive, and at the same time be clear that we also have expectations that those institutions can succeed with all those populations. So I think we can change the tone, but I don't think we want to lose our clarity around expectations. Does that sound like a fair compromise for everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't suggest that we should minimize the extent to which there are shortcomings within the system, but just as there are in early learning in K-12, and the document and its tone really takes a sense of responsibility for that, I think it needs to do that for community colleges and universities.
Doris, do you feel like you can get us there?
I feel like I have enough staff help that can help get us there.
Good. And if
I'm looking at one out in the markets.
Good. Samuel, do you have any other suggestions for how we can incorporate, or any other places in the document where we can make it clear that higher ed and community colleges, so we kind of have that one belief system, but we don't, I mean, it's sort of it is a K-12 heavy document in all fairness. So do you think we just lean in and be honest about that, or do you think we try to fix that up a little bit in other places? And if so,
well, I'm always for honesty, but I think a couple of pointed and pithy statements about high expectations, as you both were stating, for post-secondary education would be appropriate. Even as we discuss with our colleagues on the OEIB the whole notion of achievement compacts, and the question is, you know, what are we expecting? What are we looking for? I think that becomes a significant discussion with all of post-secondary, and I think we could just do a couple of quick sentences of framing it up so that discussion continues.
Okay. In the purpose, or in the,
I would say yes. In maybe, yeah, in our purpose. I think, for example, when we talk about opportunity gaps in the second paragraph, that we are highlighting that, and the achievement gap is usually spoken of K through 12, but a parallel gap, but I'm not sure we have a name for it, it exists in post-secondary, and so it might be worth it to somehow put something there. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. I think most of our energy and effort is to put this framework out there and then really follow up and do something about it. I mean, not that this isn't doing something, and what you say is critically important, but I think there are going to be some other points, and they're not that far down the road to say, okay, let's go back and when you make an achievement compact, where is equity in that achievement compact, and also when we're doing performance appraisals, and we've talked a lot about K through 12, we haven't talked so much about post-secondary. I think there are some ways to have tighter performance appraisals at the post-secondary level that deal with equity issues. And I say that as somebody who participates in them as a faculty member, but there needs to be a higher level of accountability in terms of program admissions, in terms of program success rate, in terms of what really happens in the whole spectrum. And that has been something that has been more laissez-faire than anything else in terms of many post-secondary, particularly university level. It has not been as laissez-faire at the community college level.
So it sounds like the preamble is actually what we're talking about, and that may be an opportunity to even include a statement that is really clear that this is not just about K through 12, this is about early childhood all the way to secondary. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
So, so we're going to talk through two more issues, and then Rob, I'm going to ask you to. Did you have a comment now? I'm going to ask you to give us specific feedback later. I'm giving you a forewarning. Do you have a comment about this topic though? No. Okay. So I'm going to move us to the two suggestions we received. One about a very clear belief statement about teachers and our support to give teachers the tools to serve all students well. We have excuse me, some specific recommended language provided by Chalkboard about that, and the comment that we received from our advisory committee that there's not a strong enough belief statement about students. So if it would be helpful, I can read the direct feedback from Chalkboard, which was, in the belief section, we'd like to see a statement added about the importance of supporting great teaching. Research is clear that teachers have the most significant impact on student success in the classroom. Closing the achievement gaps will require excellent classroom instruction for every student. So this is their suggestion. We believe that Oregon's professional educators must receive the tools and support to meet the needs of all of their students. Training in culturally responsive instruction is essential. We also believe that Oregon has a responsibility to recruit, attract, and prepare a more diverse educator workforce. So that sounds pretty good. For some shortened version of it, sounds like it would be a great addition. Thoughts, perspectives?
I agree that sounds good. I have and this is just a personal, and I'm not sure it's wider. On number 3, the uplift the entire community. I love the concept. I'm not sure I like the words. They bring too much of Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise in 1895, but I teach history, so you know, it's and basically what he said there was that black people shouldn't settle for political rights, that they should settle for doing well in trade schools. And so uplift uplift the community has some trigger pieces there. But I think the sentiment that they're expressing, and particularly supporting teachers and the work of teachers, I'm not sure if this is me and I yield to my colleagues. I look at a 5-year-old a little differently than a workforce participant, and I'm struggling with it. I know we're working on outcomes and some real specific kinds of things, and I don't have any problem with that. But I would like us so that our language and our views are what's good for children and families and the whole of it, rather than on the road to workforce development. I don't have a particular alternative to that, but and I'm not saying we forget workforce development, but I guess from also having a humanities background, that I want our 5-year-olds to have a lot more than workforce development in terms of where they're going, and I see the literacy skills as enabling some of that, but also building social capital.
Mm-hmm. So is the maybe the third we believe comment or we believe statement in the draft document actually kind of calls out institutions of higher education about reflecting our staff and students? I mean, could we actually take some of Chalkboard's feedback and modify that belief statement so that we're not going to have 50 belief statements, but also be sort of incorporate that piece in, and it's really, I mean, the way that this one is framed is really, it's about creating the best environment for students, and it's very student-focused versus workforce-focused, but it still gets to the same outcome. How do folks feel about that? I mean, it would take a significant rewrite, but it would, it's the...
Well, I'm not sure take a significant, well, it would be significant what's said, but I don't think it should be an extensive rewrite.
Okay.
I think a couple of well-placed sentences and clauses would take us there. I mean, we are still aiming for this as a big framework piece. Despite our temptation to get happy wordsmithing, I see most of what we've outlined here as being consistent both with the comments we've had back and what we are seeking to do. So I would, a few tweakings there would seem to me to be adequate.
Nicole, I would just strongly endorse the chalkboard suggestion or have a statement regarding teachers. I think that's very helpful.
Yes.
And then just in general, I think this document does a terrific job of not being overly sort of workforce oriented. I think there's a lot of language in here that speaks to the growth and development of whole people, if you will, that are more than just workers. And so take Dr. Henry's point that maybe ways to modify the language, but also would compliment the authors for getting beyond that.
Welcome, Governor. We are in the middle of sort of working through a few areas of deliberation, and to give you the big framework, we are looking to bring our most completed document to the April OEIB board for feedback and adoption. And we are kind of in our final phase of feedback and discussion. So we have kind of 2 more topics to work through, and then we would love to invite you to give us feedback and perspective as well as Rob. So, yes. So the second area of feedback we received was from our advisory committee that made a suggestion that we needed kind of additional belief statements about students specifically. And at this time we have, we actually start off with a belief statement which we thought addressed that, which was we believe that every learner has the ability to learn and that we have a moral responsibility to ensure a structure that provides optimal learning environments that lead students to be prepared for their future. So Doris, do you have anything else you want to add to that particular piece of feedback about how we may have missed something or could add or strengthen?
I guess my feedback at this point is that there are a lot of loaded words in the document, and if it's not being clear to people what it means when we talk about the moral responsibility, that if we need to be clearer, we can add more language to it. But the reality there is that we have to believe that every student from birth through our 20P20 system has to be afforded everything that we can provide to make them successful going through our system and into life. And we have a moral responsibility to do that. But we can work on the language if you feel that something needs to be added to it, that would make it clearer for people. I think sometimes when we try to add, then we take away what the intent is there.
Yeah, and then just open it up to other committee members. And I feel like the hope of the entire document is to make it crystal clear that we do believe that every child and learner can learn. And I think the attempt was to weave that throughout the document with as much affirmation of students as possible. So I may have a blind spot, but I think it's there. So I'm just curious if the committee, if we're missing something. Other thoughts and perspectives?
Phil, I agree with you. I believe it is already there. We certainly want to support the feedback that we've gotten from our advisory group. But already embedded in what we believe and what we're going for are, I believe, most of what they've asked for.
So I'm actually going to invite our governor to give feedback and perspective, and actually also invite you, as you think about your general comments, to give us any guidance as well on one particular issue. As we've gone through this effort, we've tried to be really clear about our focus and our charge for rural communities, students of color, out-of-school youth, and throughout the document we've also included some minimal language around, for example, many out-of-school youth leave school because they're from lesbian and gay communities and don't feel safe. So we have a reference to that. We do have some strong language in here about special education. We have received some encouragement about expanding the document to address issues of disability, as well as a stronger focus on poverty and LGBTQ issues. Our challenge is that when we have looked at efforts like this around the country and local efforts, we have found that when folks try to make one document fit everything, it sort of gives license for everybody to be ignored and to be less specific about very concrete outcomes. The other feedback we've heard is that certainly rural students of color, and out-of-school youth make up significant portions of students with disabilities, students in poverty, and LGBTQ communities. So we're just struggling with, how we handle that. I think it's better for us to be really clear and really honest about what our charge is and what we are trying to cover, rather than trying to make it expansive and not be successful at anything. So if when you're giving us your feedback, if you want to give us any of your considerations on that, we would welcome those.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. This is, I've had a chance to look at this piece. I have not had a chance to go through all of the input, but I am actually very impressed with this document. I mean, I think that to the issue that you just brought up, I mean, it is a challenge, because I think in many cases, if your group, if you will, is not specifically mentioned, there's an understandable sense that you're being left out. But I think this net, the attributes of what you've put down here, really is a broad net. It captures just about everybody. I'm just struck by the power of this document. And I think a couple of things struck me. There was a point in here when you talked about the most diverse element of our population, which is kids 0 to 5. And you also pointed out, and I agree completely, if we want to change, move the dial on student outcomes, this is where you're going to get your greatest gains. This is where there is the greatest inequity, and they overlap. So by making this group successful, by successfully carrying out the objectives and goals of this document, not only do you reduce disparities and make our society more equitable, but you also begin to get the overall educational system outcomes that are really embedded in 40-40-20. So again, I apologize going over the detail of the input, but I think this is a really solid starting point. I guess one of my questions is, then we take this, and then how do we actually make this an action tool, and how do we put in place waypoints that can tell us that we are making progress or not? Because I think this needs to be sort of a living document. We need to put this down on paper. We need to make a run at it, and if we find out that we're not getting where we need to go, we need to sort of reevaluate our strategies. But I think this is an excellent, and my enthusiasm now is, how do we take this and actually take this lens and make it real and tangible, so people can see it, and that we can begin to get the results that we need.
So I can share what our thinking is and why we sort of started where we started. So I think we felt like we needed really to be clear about why Oregon needed a document like this. And the reason that we sort of went forward, so we have a preamble that kind of, in as positive of a way as we could find, kind of states our problem as a state and the consequences. And then sort of the case for equity, which is really why this benefits us all. And then to be really clear, the reason that we included such expansive belief statements was that it was a feeling among many of our committee members and kind of feedback we heard from educational leaders that, and this will be important feedback for you, Rob, is that so often when we talk about students, it's still acceptable to make statements as though not all students can learn, or statements of, well, if we don't have the resources, we don't have to do it, and so on and so forth. And so what we were trying to do is to say at the highest level, the OEIB, the highest educational governing body, believes that all students can learn, and the 12 other belief statements we have following, so that essentially Rudy and Rob and all of our educational leaders at the state level can then sort of make it a non-negotiable going forward. There's certainly a big need to create some policies and some supporting pieces of work that frankly probably have to come from the administrative side, and really how every RFP will be evaluated based on these values and belief systems, how every funding decision will be made, and really figuring out how to institutionalize that. We do have a real challenge in that you have the State Department of Education, and then you have all of these local jurisdictions who have their own boards and their own purview of control. So we have to figure that piece out. But I think it'd be great, Rob, to hear from you. Sort of, we have this hope that this document will somehow empower and change the culture of the Department of Education by setting out clear expectations. But I'd love to hear from you how you see that happening, how we could make this document better to support you in that effort. Even frankly, having leadership from your department that shifts their language to some of this wording would be very helpful. So I'll just invite you to add or contradict anything that I have said.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to talk about this a little bit. I read the document with a great deal of interest. I have to tell you that these are really hard documents to write. I have made several attempts myself over the course of my career, and gotten a lot of input and feedback, and it's hard to get it right and meet both the needs of everybody who's going to read it, but then also have it really speak to people so that it gives them actions that they can take that are going to really make a difference on outcomes with kids. So I thought that the document was really strong. I enjoyed reading it. I found myself head nodding and appreciating way more often than I anticipated that I would, because usually when I read things like this, it is so easy for me to be critical. At the same time, I'll give you my feedback on it, and I'll just sort of lay it out really honestly, and then take it for what it's worth, because it's just one person's thought. I'm going to start with the definition of equity, and the reason I want to start there is because it's on the second to last page. I thought it was a really good definition for equity, and when I read it, I just thought, I don't think I can improve on this at all. And so if that is the lens that you want to apply to equity, then when you read the preamble, the draft equity lens, it is the definition that you can apply then to the preamble. And so as I read that, I found that I thought that the preamble was very appropriate and accurate based on that definition of equity. But it did cause me to ask the question, when we're talking about this, what does our focus need to be? What should it be? And if we're going to have a focus on race, which in my opinion is really appropriate. Right now in the state of Oregon, we can expect that a student has a 55% chance, if they're a student of color, to graduate in 4 years out of high school. And it just is really unacceptable when we look at that outcome. And I believe that unless we focus on that and are highly intentional on it, we won't move the dial. And it isn't that there aren't, certainly other underserved populations. There are. And it made me wonder if perhaps we needed almost two documents. One that really it talks about equity in the broader sense, and another that talks about race in a very specific sense. So that was just my wondering as I read the document. Again, I'm not trying to give the group a ton more work, because I think that would add fairly significantly to the work, but nonetheless it was what came to mind for me. I was a little bit, I'll get real specific here. I had a question about why in the preamble it talks about, specifically in the second paragraph, low-income rural students. And I wondered if there was a difference intentionally between low-income rural and low-income urban students. And maybe there was, and I just don't get it. So I would leave that for what it's worth. I also thought in the preamble that there is a significant discussion about how this work has the potential to drive kind of outcomes for Oregon in a financial sense or in an economic sense. And I was really looking for some language about the moral sense and the moral duty that we have to meet the needs of all students. And I found that very clearly in the first belief statement. It was the very first belief statement. I thought it was the right place for that belief statement to be. That we have this is a moral duty. And so I was really hoping that there might be something about the moral duty that's added to the preamble around this. Probably my only other real thought, well, I have a couple others, I guess. One was 40-40-20. We talk about 40-40-20 and everybody understands really clearly what it means. I wondered if in this document we didn't need to call out 40-40-20 with a higher level of specificity and say 40-40-20 with students who traditionally have been underserved achieving those benchmarks in equal measure. We just call it out really specifically, but that's what we mean. We don't mean 40-40-20 and some students are the 40 and some of the 20 and some of the whatever it happens to be, but that would be the expectation if we're truly going to talk about equity and close the achievement gap. The belief statement on the third page, the third one down, talks about communities, parents, teachers, and community-based organizations. And the last line of that belief statement, and have the courage to share decision-making, control, and resources, was one that I thought was really important, especially the part about resources. If we're going to cause this to happen, we have to think about our resources in a really different way. We have to have the courage to allocate those resources in a way that's going to improve the equitable outcomes for our students. And that is a hard discussion for people to talk about. And so I was hoping that we might be able to call that out in maybe even almost in its own belief statement. I really believe that we've got to get to that. And the last thing for real this time is that I thought that chalkboards number 5, I just want to reemphasize that closing the achievement gaps will require excellent classroom instruction for every student, and we believe that Oregon's professional educators must receive the tools and support they need to meet the needs of all students. Is a completely true statement, and one that we need to recognize in a very strong way, and it really starts with some of the things that we've been talking about. So it really starts with our educator effectiveness work. We've talked about up to $120 million in an initiative in this upcoming biennium. I believe that if we're going to get at this, it is completely important that we attract the best and the brightest, and that the teachers that we attract into the profession look like the students that they educate, and that we demand that any educator is going to have a heart for equity in the work that they do. And that means that we need to be really specific and well-informed and intentional about the pre-service instruction that our teachers receive, about the training that they receive about understanding their own racial identity and the identity of the students that they serve, and that they need to understand how to intentionally implement culturally relevant pedagogy into their teaching practices if we're going to ever get to a place where we truly are able to close achievement gaps. So that's a bunch of stuff. I recognize that. I apologize. You asked the question. I'll tell you what I thought about that. Again, even with all that I sort of laid out there, I think this is an exceptional document, and really to the writers, I cannot compliment you enough. If I was going to choose one thing, I would say let's have a preamble about equity, and let's have a preamble about race and outcomes for our students of color. That's very specific.
So those are really excellent points. I really appreciate that feedback, and I think that your comment about the definition of equity being very strong and figuring out how to be clear about race is a challenge that we can accept. I think that we probably will need to think about how to make the preamble really talk about why equity is of value to everyone in Oregon and why we are choosing to focus. And just be really honest about that. How does that sound to the committee? I think 2 documents sounds a little...
Yes.
2 documents sounds easier to ignore than 1 document.
I agree, and I'm sure it can be done in 1. I always feel bad when I say something like that because I know that somebody's going to have a huge amount of work to attempt to do that. At the same time, I would be happy to try to help if when that time comes.
Okay. Just a couple of add-ons to what Rob said. I do think trying to work in the emphasis on race is important because that really is where we move the dial and get a lot of this stuff. I also think that sort of spelling out the 40-40-20 is really important. I've been struck by one of the metrics that we use in the Oregon Business Plan, which is increased per capita income. Well, you could increase a small number of people's income a whole lot, and actually a lot of other people's income would go down, and you would have increased overall per capita income, which would not have increased equity. So I think it's important for people to understand what we're talking about here. Just 2 other really quick points on the professional support, professional development, teacher effectiveness, teacher diversity is really important. And one of the things that I'm sort of discouraged about is that we started out with the funding source by trying to rejigger a little bit of money in the ESDs, and that got caught pretty much in turf. And the discussion has sort of fallen off, and we can't let it go. I mean, it's a tight budget. The co-chair's budget has a lot of assumptions built into it, but we can't let that one go, because if we're serious about this, you've got to have the teaching force to do it. And so I just wanted to put that marker down. The last thing, I'm going to talk about this a little bit this afternoon, is I am enormously excited about the possibility of going to regional achievement compacts and having a couple pilots that look sort of like our regional solutions teams. And for those of you who don't know what that is, we've essentially taken, I think we've got 6 or 7 regions around the state with a local convener, and we've co-located different state agencies in those regions. And what they do is they develop a set of local priorities, and then they get everybody in the community who's involved together, and they sign what's called a declaration of cooperation. Specifically, here's what I'm going to do to this outcome. It seems to me that we've sort of left our educational system floating out there and expecting them, the teachers and the staff, to do everything and leaving the larger community out. And I think A, it doesn't work, and B, a lot of people want to be engaged. And the idea would be that, particularly with this equity lens, if you, let's say we did a Central Oregon pilot, you would get not only educators together, but you'd get the faith community, the business community, the civic community, the philanthropic community, and identify what the problems and challenges are and see what everyone can bring to the table. And one of those pilots might be a very good place to actually intentionally, as part of that pilot, use this equity lens. We have to sort of pick where we want that pilot to take place. But I think that would make it real quicker than trying to, it'd be hard to see it sort of system-wide, but if you had an area where this is really elevated, we might actually lose some life into this sooner.
Sure, Bob. Governor. I've actually been working quite closely on the regional achievement compacts, and I think that's a tremendous suggestion. And one of the things I really like about this equity lens is that it really stands as an opportunity to really shape the focus of our work and not just be something that we incorporate, but really shape the focus and the charge of what we're trying to create. Oftentimes equity has been perceived as just an additional set of tools to assimilate kids towards a certain norm. But this actually sort of changes the focus a little bit, and once we internalize this, we say, no, that's not what's being defined in this document, but in fact it's a system that's going to be responsive to the needs of the kids, whatever their needs, and students and families, so on and so forth. So I think in a way this could really provide a new North Star for us. And if we internalize it not only as a committee but as a greater board and as a state, I think this is where we're really going to start to see equity being brought to the educational process. And furthermore, this is thinking that's been internalized in the creation of these regional compacts. And that's why I'm really excited about the fact that you said these two things work together. But it also, stands to have a lot of effect on things like the data system, where the questions that we're asking fundamentally about what are these needs the students have, and how do we know them, and how do we make sure that the teachers are aware of them. So I really think that this is a lens that's going to spread and shape a lot of our work in areas we may not have even expected it to shape.
Well, I think that's sort of the next piece, and thank you for that comment, because that is our hope with this document. But the question for you, Rob, is really, we sort of tried to lay out very high-level belief systems, really changing the North Star, if you will. The actual lens is the way that we created it, was sort of a series of questions, and the trick is to not have too many questions, in all fairness, from everything we saw. But how would you, and we recognize we're not the committee to come up with all the policies and implementation, and we're not going to rewrite your RFP processes for you, although I'm sure we would be very good at it.
You might welcome some help.
So how do you see this being implemented, and is there anything we can do to make it better, to make your job easier in that implementation?
I just want to be clear, so that I know the question for sure. You're not talking about specifically about RFP, but you're talking about all parts of the...
All parts. RFP is my best example.
Yes,
but,
okay. Yes. Wow, there are a lot of different pieces of that. I'm very excited about a retreat that the state board has coming up in April. I think April 29th, is that right?
26th.
26th. April 26th, and we had a very good lunch discussion the other day talking about taking a look at the Oregon administrative rules that we have passed over time that oftentimes are responsive to laws that are passed, or sometimes are moves that the state board wants to make in order to improve, the outcomes that we have with kids, the way that we do our work, and really taking that and using the benchmark as the metrics that we have put out on our strategic plans. So we have two strategic plans now, the OEIB strategic plan and then the Oregon Department of Education strategic plan. The metrics on goal 1 in those two strategic plans are identical, and they should be, because it's about the outcomes that we expect to achieve with students. One of the things that we need to start to do is looking at all of our documents and placing a lens on those about what could we do with those, with the laws that we write, with the rules that we have, with the RFPs that we let, and then comparing those to what our intended metrics are. Saying, what is it that we're going to do with those things so that we can reach these metrics? And every one of those metrics, well, almost every one on goal 1 talks about closing the achievement gap. And so we need to be very intentional as we read through those and think about those in all processes. But the state board has an opportunity, I believe, to look at those and think about, are there any pieces within those that cause us to be able to not achieve? And of course, it has to be really thoughtful. We don't want to, lower the bar in any way, shape, or form. But oftentimes we have institutional racism, and it is absent of malice. It just is that we've written things without really applying a racial lens to the rules that we write, and we need to review those and make sure that we get those squared away. So that's one part. Another part is at the Department of Education right now, we have 2.5 FTE that have something to do with what I would think could possibly be about closing the achievement gap. We have a 0.25 person who's assigned to Native American affairs. We have 1.5 that are federally funded ELL folks who monitor school districts in the way that they do their work around ELL. That's what they do, they monitor. There's nothing there about best practice. And then we have a person, a 1.0 person who does work on civil rights. And it just isn't appropriate. And it's part of the reason that I wanted to point out the comment about resource and the way that we resource things. We do not have an arm at the Department of Education that focuses on closing achievement gaps, ELL, and best practice work out in the field. We're all about compliance. We need to change that. And we need to change that no matter how that comes. And I will tell you that I've been in front of Ways and Means over the past week or so, and I've talked about this with Ways and Means on several occasions because I'd really like to see us have some dollars to be able to affect the change and have an appropriate group. I've gone out and hired David Batista, who has been the Woodburn superintendent of the Woodburn School District. And David is as expert in ELL as any person in the state. I'm really excited to have him on board. Now it really will be up to me, and it is a moral imperative for me to make sure that we have the staff that he can work with that can go out and begin to help school districts be intentional about their work on closing achievement gaps and specifically working with students around ELL and Native American and so forth. And so we need to resource it. And we're going to resource it one way or another. Whether we get some additional dollars or we change how we use the dollars that we have. And I will tell you that my staff says, quit saying that because it'd be so much better to get new money, and I agree. But we need to do it one way or another. And so that will be an important piece of work. And then when we have those folks, they will have some very specific outcomes that we need to achieve. Certainly they're identified in the metrics in the strategic plan and beyond. And my intent would be to have them begin to apply an equity lens to all the work that we do at the department. And so that will be a beginning. And I would circle back around one more time and say all four of the strategic initiatives that we have asked that the governor has moved forward and that we've asked for funding are very specific about equity and will have an impact on the outcomes for kids. And again, I would say that finding a way to get at the effective educator piece will be as important as anything that we have to do.
Great. That's really helpful. And as you think about it, if there's other ways we can improve the document to strengthen the ability to do that, we want this to be a tool that is used and a catalyst for change. So it's very important for us. And I did want to return back to an earlier question that you asked about why we included the term low-income rural students. And part of that is in response to, there's actually quite significant data kind of around the difference in outcome around race and poverty. And lots of really, really smart people look at the data and ignore it. But Dr. Ann Curry-Stephen in her coalition report actually was able to call out that in Oregon, when you look at achievement for African American, Native American, Latino students, and some immigrant groups, even if the family is of higher income, there's actually no educational bump for their family being higher income. So lots of people like to say, oh, it's just an issue of poverty, but when you break it down in those populations, there's no additional benefit from being middle or higher income, which really leads us to a perspective that it's really about race in many cases. However, there is a small bump for white students if their families are from a higher income, and some of the populations you see really academically struggling are actually low-income rural white students. And so I think we were trying to be conscientious that there's achievement gaps in those populations as well. Is it the best way to say it? Maybe not. But that's what our intent was to sort of honor and recognize that a lot of times low-income white rural students feel left out when they have some pretty significant disparities. So if you have ideas about how to say it better.
I don't right now, but I'd certainly be happy to look at it. Thank you. I did want to say, too, that next Thursday, Wednesday and Thursday, Friday, I think it's Thursday and Friday. Next Thursday and Friday, we, in partnership with COSA, have our first statewide ELL conference. We've never had a statewide ELL. We've never had a conference like that before. I'm really excited about it. We brought experts in from all over the nation, really, to work with over 400 educators in the state of Oregon on this very specific issue. Yeah, it's the 14th. This next week, yes. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. It is this week. Wow, I'm running fast. This week, and we're really excited about that. And I think if, I don't know where we are with this document, but I was thinking it would be so great to be able to, hold this up, as you've talked about. Can we use this document to begin to do some work and hold this document up and share it with people at the conference, because I know that they'll be really invigorated by the work that has been done here.
I would like to counter that suggestion with a request. We actually have a list of about 50 organizations that we're looking for direct feedback. COSA is actually number 3 on that list. I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but if there is an opportunity to really solicit feedback and ask for their endorsement of this document, we would love to come to the April OEIB meeting with not only COSA's endorsement, but the endorsement of many other organizations. So if we don't put you in an awkward spot, but Doris and I can come and we can, we'd love to get their direct input and support. And we actually are scheduled to conclude this part of the discussion at 9:20 and take a break. So I'll ask for any of those who have to leave us to look at our list of 50 organizations and give us advice about who we're missing. We think it's really important that we have endorsements from the business community and every educational organization, as well as communities of color and rural communities. But as far as, so that's one to do on the break. And then I would ask if anyone has any additional comments to conclude before we...
I just sort of a little housekeeping thing. If we're going to take it out to COSA, I would just keep the draft on it.
Yes.
Stamped on it, so people don't think it's the final document, because that seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes we overlook that. And if there are specific groups that you want feedback from, that would be if I can be of help calling their executive directors or whatever, let me know, because I want them to know that this is really important that they engage in this. So just let me know.
And we may need to call on your help with some of our larger business organizations.
Okay.
I actually suspect that they will be some of the strongest supporters, but an ask from you might help elevate this as a higher priority to just make a comment.
Okay, well, why don't I do OEC, OBA, EBA, and AOI?
Perfect.
Okay, I'll make those phone calls. And when will they be getting this? I'll tell them just keep your heads up.
As soon as I get the information from you, I can send it out. It's
Okay.
already ready to send.
Okay.
And it's gone out to the people that are listed on your spreadsheet. So,
Just one quick comment back to the rural, because we were talking about it in terms of K through 12, and there are some distinct pieces as we talk about moving from K through 12 to post-secondary that are distinct issues, access to community colleges and access to post-secondary, all of post-secondary, but universities is really constricted by geography and the rural geography in particular. So I just want to keep that out there in terms of, as we were thinking about why we put it in and why it has such moment, that continuity piece is an incredible piece.
Great. Excellent. Any other last comments before we conclude with a break?
I would like to probably state the obvious, but this is a significant and courageous document. And after 40-some years as an educator, I'm really pleased to be on this particular subcommittee and supporting the work of the equity document. I would like to call the advisory committee back together and pose the question to them how to make it real. So we have this, the document is moving forward, and I think they'll give us tremendous feedback in that area, and I would look forward to that conversation with them. I would also just like to thank you, Governor Kitzhaber, for your courage and support of the work of an equity lens and a document that will frame the conversation in the state. I think it's a really courageous move on your part, and I'd like to thank you for that.
Absolutely, and I think in our research, we may, in all fairness, we did steal some good language from some other communities across the country, but we may have the most comprehensive document once we're done with it. So,
We will.
And it will say work in progress,
yes.
working document.
So we'll conclude with a break and be back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
will reconvene. And at this time, we would like to invite Doris Crew again to share our outreach plan and our planning for the OEIB April meeting and any additional next steps we might have.
Okay, thank you, Chair Marr and subcommittee and staff. We are, and our community at large, we have reached out, as is indicated earlier in our conversation, to about 50 or more organizations and individuals. We will continue to reach out to the organizations that have been suggested by our governor, and some names and organizations given to me earlier by Chair Marr. I would encourage you, if you are in our audience and you have organizations that you would like to make sure we are reaching out to, that either you drop me a note or just leave something over on the table that says, have you thought about reaching out to? Even if it's not on our, even if it's on our list, I'll be able to know whether or not we've already sent it. So, and I would say the same for our staff and for our subcommittee. We want to make sure that our outreach is as broad as possible so that we get good feedback and the document will develop into one that we're all able to use and be proud of. So when the letter was sent out to organizations, it asked for written feedback. It asked for an opportunity to have face-to-face conversations with their organizations if they chose to do that. So we've tried to, or for telephone conversations. So we've tried to reach out in as many ways as possible. And I will follow up personally with phone calls to organizations we sent out that I have not heard back from, so that by the time we meet for our next subcommittee meeting, I'll be able to update our subcommittee on those efforts as well. The plan is to take the equity lens to the OEIB at the April meeting and ask for their approval of the document. I'm not sure what the process will be. There generally is a first reading and then the approval of the document. So I'm not sure that OEIB would approve the document in April. I would think it's probably, we're probably looking at May before there is an approval on the document. We would also be contacting and encouraging our groups and organizations to come and present testimony to our OEIB during that the conversation in April, so that they will have a perspective from various communities about their support of the document moving forward. They will also receive the written comments that people are sending in as well. So that is the outreach plan at this point.
Just to clarify, Doris, I thought that today at our OEIB meeting we were sharing that the draft equity policy was available in sort of the committee check-ins, and then if folks had feedback, they could give it to us in the next month, but we would be seeking full approval in April. I don't know if Ben or...
Trevor, there will be opportunity at OEIB today for the committee to provide an update to the full OEIB on this work, and I think it's entirely up to you whether to present and make available this draft equity plans. I can't see why you wouldn't as a draft piece of work for the
They have now received it twice on the Friday emails from Dr. Rudy Crew, so perhaps what I can do is explicitly give them that timeline for feedback in the next month, because I think if we can build the momentum in April to have a really strong presentation, get as much feedback as possible, have that public testimony, I think we should push for a vote on April if it's possible. Otherwise, we're sort of extending it out an additional, and that's 2 months away, and I would love to see the document begin to be implemented as soon as possible. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I feel a sense of urgency to pass it and move on to other important work if that's possible.
I think that we could get clarification during the OEIB meeting today about how they will proceed with that, because the document that they received on Friday would be the one that you've been looking at with draft on it. If they are comfortable moving that in April with the few tweaks that we've talked about today, then I'm sure we could get approval. But I think it would really be up to OEIB today to decide the timeline from there. I agree with you on the urgency, and I would love to push for April approval.
And do we have a sense if we had an hour on the agenda or a half hour or any?
This afternoon.
No, in April.
Oh, in April.
At this point, I have not received a time frame for our discussion in April. However, I have had a conversation with Kathleen Healy, our Chief of Staff, so she knows it will be on the agenda, but I don't have the time frame at this point.
And then for that presentation, we are planning kind of a presentation by the coalition, kind of explaining the need and the opportunity, and then we will probably invite members of this committee to help present the work. And I think we have actually several committee groups who are interested in coming and testifying, so I think we can expect and plan for time for public testimony because there is such a level of excitement and enthusiasm, which we love. Anything else on the outreach plan, planning for the OEIB meeting, or any other next steps we should be considering?
No, not at this time.
Nope, so supportive of getting it done as soon as possible. Obviously, going through what we need to in terms of rules. I think Doris's question about making it real it applies to not just the convening of the advisory board, but in terms of back to the OEIB. And I think if you'll pardon, it gets realer when there's a sense of immediacy to it, and so definitely support for that. Let me just ask though, I know it's the next item in terms of the revised issues brief, but will they? Is it our thought that they would both go forward at the same time, or what's our thinking with respect to as we? I know we're giving an update this afternoon, but in terms of those two co-joined, or we're going to keep them separate, or is this?
Well, in my mind, the issues brief was separate,
okay.
And that it was a work of this subcommittee,
Mm-hmm.
and that this subcommittee could approve this as an issues brief
Okay.
for distribution. Now, I need to check that because procedurally, I may be misspeaking, and if that's the case, then I can let you know before the OEIB meeting.
Okay. I just thought, as long as we're putting it out there, let's put both of them if we can. But that's where I'm sitting.
Well, the one thing about the issues brief, if we need to have it approved that way, I would agree. I just don't want to confuse the conversation.
Gotcha.
And I would rather get the equity list out there and approved, separate from taking this to the full board for approval. But let me check on whether we need to, because my thinking was that the subcommittee would be able to approve this as their document.
Right.
And that it was not an OEIB full board approval needed, but I will verify that.
Yeah, I think, and we can move in. I think we've completed our task on this item, and we can actually move on to the revised issues brief. And I am not familiar with us approving other issues briefs at OEIB, and actually I'm curious, even at this level, about what does it mean for us to even approve this issues brief. So maybe we can move into that agenda item and start with kind of the understanding of why it is relevant to approve this document.
Okay. So Johanna will come to the table to talk about the document further, but let me just start by saying, in my mind, I'm thinking that in order to have this document available for distribution under the subcommittee's name, that there needs to be support. And the support would come in the form of approval by the committee. You can see by the document itself that your names are on this as the header, that this is not a full committee document. So my thinking is that it would move forward in that manner. And I know that pardon my, I guess, informal language, but I know my hands will be slapped severely if it's not the right procedure. So, I'll take that spanking and then move back to the procedure that we need to use. But that's what I'm thinking at this point.
Do we need a is there
well, right now, I'd like to have Joanna present the changes, because at the last meeting, the subcommittee made suggestions, and she's made changes. The document you have before you is the revised document.
I'll hold off on a motion for approval until after Johanna has.
All right, thank you very much. So again, my name is Joanna Blackford, and just a reminder of who I am and where I come from. So I am a joint public policy intern. I am a doctoral student at Portland State University, and this particular internship arose out of work with the Oregon Advocacy Commission's office in partnership with Portland State University. I work closely with Mr. Pat Burke, Dr. Pat Burke back there, and it is in support of the work of the OEIB, particularly the Education Equity Partnership Subcommittee, this committee here. And through many conversations, this particular issue brief for disproportionate discipline, along with future briefs that we have talked about at the meeting, has arisen. So, in terms of this brief, the purpose of this brief really is to present the issue of disproportionate discipline in Oregon, and as opposed to providing any specific policy recommendations or providing, in a sense, the data in this document is to speak for itself of the challenges that we face here in Oregon. In terms of the changes that this document has gone through from last month to this month, there are some very specific recommendations made by this board, and I'll draw those to your attention. First, in the overview, it was requested that elementary and middle school be pulled out and pulled apart to show that while many people believe that discipline issues are mainly in high school, it's not the case in Oregon. The chart beside that primary offense report resulting in disciplinary action remains the same as it had before, and that really just pulls out this idea that, or this fact that disruptive behavior is the highest, most, the most prevalent type of disciplinary action that occurs within Oregon. Moving down to the disaggregated data by race, these have been shifted. So what you'll see in the text area is within the disaggregated race ethnicity categories, the percent of disciplinary incidents, individuals with one or more disciplinary incident. What you'll see beside that in the chart is a different population versus discipline incidents. Here, the chart is designed to demonstrate what the segregated population percentage is in Oregon for students as compared to the disciplined population percentage. So, for example, Hispanic Latino is 21% of our population, yet shares 25% of the disciplinary incidents. On the reverse, last time we had a chart beside here that looked at dropout rates, and the comment was made it was a dropout rate chart that was for a single year dropout rate chart. This has gone through about 6 iterations in the last month, and we've finally landed on using statewide graduation rates and using the 4-year cohort and 5-year completer rate, because those match the achievement compacts. When looking to get the 5-year cohort dropout rate, that number wasn't specifically available in a way that we could access at this time. So this, we hoped, would really help show in another way, while acknowledging that it's missing the people between 8th grade and 9th grade who aren't in this cohort, who don't complete high school. The best available information that we had at this time. Underlying factors, we've added the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point there. We've added a note on institutional racism. Trying to really bring that out as a clear factor. And again, with alternative options, it was commented last month that it was really too student-focused, like it was a student problem. So really trying to pull back and bring a whole system problem, a systemic problem that addresses adults, students, and the system as part of the solution. And really tried to switch the language to not focus on the students, but rather on systemic issues. So that is where it exists today.
I was just informed by Seth Allen that we do not have a majority, so we cannot take a vote on the document. We could do that at our April meeting. We could hold it until then.
Short of having a quorum, though, I would like to express a sense of support for the document, for the changes that Johanna has been instrumental in working with other staff and folks on. And even though we can't take an official vote, I would query as to whether or not, if we do, those of us who are here, and support this in terms of bringing it forward before our colleagues on the OEIB at this point.
And I think it's an excellent document, and I really appreciate it. It's very clear from the changes that you really heard the feedback and incorporated that, so thank you.
I just feel there's a need to share it. I mean, some things you keep to yourself, but other things you get out there and you share. And I think all of our discussions revolve around pieces like this, and this is a significant piece.
Well, in particular, the fact that 65% of our behavioral incidents are happening before middle school, and when you tie that to the incredible dropout rate that happens in 7th and 8th grade for so many students of color, and the fact that they're not even getting to high school to be counted in that cohort is really important as we shape all of the work of the OEIB. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And just the final note, so the next one I'm moving forward with, and I just want to make sure that everyone on this committee is happy with that, is the English language learner issue brief, which I think is quite timely at this point. So hoping we can bring that to the table next.
Is there plans for an issue brief as well on special education and how the inequities that exist for students of color?
We definitely have discussed that. It's not in the actual internship document, but we've been also talking about the timeliness and being able to swap things out. So I know Doris has specifically mentioned that, and if that's what this committee feels would be after ELL or before the next most important area to address, then I'd be happy to do that.
We'll let Doris manage that. I don't want to like a rogue committee chair. I mean, no more than usual, that is. At this time, we'd like to invite anyone to share public testimony. And we have no one signed up for public testimony, so we will thank the committee and thank our audience for being part of this important work, and thank Rob and Doris for all their support and hard work as well.